Well, good morning. It's great to be in this space with you all. Actually, the last time I was in this space was within the past year, and the singer-songwriter who actually penned the tune "I Heard an Owl" was performing a concert right in this space. And so and I was sitting right where you all are. So it looks a lot different over here than it does from over there. If you don't believe me, you can come up here and try it. That song by Carrie Newcomer, "I Heard an Owl," was actually her response to the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. And so when we think about that chorus again, where she's saying, "Don't tell me hate is ever right or God's will. These are the wheels we put in motion ourselves. And the whole world weeps and is weeping still. Though shaken, I still believe the best of what all can be. And the only peace this world will know can only come from love." Now, I recognize that in this group we have a number of students. And as I was reflecting upon the fact that this is the week when we remember the 18th anniversary of that tragic day, that for many of our students, you have only known a post-9/11 world. I was teaching at another United Methodist Church-affiliated college on that day in 2001, and we all gathered as a community to try to make sense of how our world was unfolding and how to make sense of our place in this world where we were shaken. As we gathered, there were messages about love of family and love of country. But also, an infectious fear also infiltrated our American psyche. And sadly, some shrewd rulers, disaster capitalists, seized the moment. And that fear has not only fostered a so-called war on terrorism, but it has also fomented a rise in xenophobia, a fear of the other, a fear of the quote-unquote stranger, and the return of a brazen white supremacy. But I heard an owl call last night, speaking eternal truths of wisdom. You see, 2001 was also the same year that our family began worshiping in an immigrant church. It was there that I learned that to be a disciple was to see one's family as rooted in something more than just blood relationship, but to see family as something rooted in community. And it just so happened that this new family that I was coming to know in this immigrant church, where we all referred to each other with the title of brother or sister, outside the walls of this church, these individuals, mostly from Guatemala and Mexico, were being given other harsh, dehumanizing titles, right? Illegals, wetbacks. These were my brothers and sisters. Interestingly, that term wetback, I've come to actually see it through a different theological lens. The theologian Bob Ekblad points out that if we are disciples of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ is not only our good shepherd, but if we want to use some 21st century language, we could say that Jesus is our good coyote. Now, if you don't understand immigrant realities, then you won't understand the fact that the coyote is the person who guides migrants through the desert, often against the law. Ekblad says that Jesus is our good coyote. Why? Because Jesus guides us against the laws of sin and death through the deserts of our lives, but as a good shepherd, as a good coyote, never abandons us, never forsakes us. The Apostle Paul, in this text that we read, was following that good coyote. And I don't know about you all, but lots of times people give testimony about how a Jesus who helps them reorder their lives and helps them thrive in life. But many times my life feels much more like that of Paul, where my life was going well until I met this guy named Jesus, right? Here's Paul, and he's in prison yet again. And in this text, he's speaking about his relationship with Onesimus, a slave, an other, a nobody. This slave happened to belong to a friend of Paul named Philemon. We don't know why Onesimus is in jail, or we don't know why he's even enslaved. We know he's young, and we know he's about to be released. Paul writes a short letter to give to his master, Philemon. See, young Onesimus, in this encounter, in this transformative place called prison, becomes family to Paul. And so he writes, and it was read, that he was sending him back as though he were sending his own heart. You see, our theology is oftentimes defined by our context. And Paul is seeing his context reshape his theology. Paul is understanding that don't ever call hate right or God's will. That enslaved peoples, massively incarcerated peoples, are the wheels we put in motion ourselves. And the whole world weeps and is weeping still. And though shaken, Paul still believed that the best that we can all be, and that the only peace this world will know, can only come from love. As I stand here today, there are approximately 4,000 migrant children in the custody of our government. Additionally, Customs and Border Protection has announced that they will not vaccinate migrant families for the upcoming flu season. Even though fairly recently, at least 3 children have died in our migrant shelters due to the flu. And the fact that the CDC nearby recommends that everyone under the age of 6, every human being under the age of 6, be vaccinated. Don't tell me hate's ever right or God's will. These are the wheels we put in motion ourselves. And the whole world weeps and is weeping still. Though shaken, I still believe the best of what we all can be. The only peace this world will know can only come from love. So Charlotte, my spouse, and I served for 3 consecutive summers at a seminary in Guatemala. And part of my task was to host students from the U.S. and Canada for like an immersion summer experience. And one summer I was asked to accompany one of these students to a family where she was going to be doing a month-long immersion homestay out in a rural part of Guatemala. We rode on bus together, went up into the Cuchamathani Mountains, and ended up in a region called the Ischil Triangle in a little town called Nevach. And Laura and I got off the bus, walked down this dusty, rocky, gravelly trail, and arrived at one of the most loving, hospitable families either of us would have ever met. I left her there, spent 24 hours just to explore the area, and then went back to the seminary. A couple of years later, Laura and a group of college students are at our community visiting us here in Georgia. She was in a university in Ohio, but they were visiting us when she received a phone call that her brother from Guatemala had come to the United States. He had maybe just turned 18. It's still debatable how old he was. But he was down in South Florida, knew no one. His family had put up their land as security to pay for his coyote's passage. He was anxious, he was alone, and wanted to know that there was family here. This slave to our economic systems, this forced migrant because of our globalized, exploitive communities and economies, wanted to know, is there a peace that comes from love and a love that comes from community or from family? And she was a college student. She didn't know what to do, and so she looked at me and said, here's my situation. What can we do? And I was like, well, can Luis get on the bus? If he can, we'll make room for him. So the next day, Luis arrived. Probably half the weight that he is now. And lived with us, I don't know how many months or a year, and then lived with another neighbor for I don't know how many months or a year, and then lived with another friend of ours for how many months, I don't know, for a year. Remember when he first arrived, he was bilingual, but it was Spanish and Ixil. And he was so determined to learn English. He would write it down, imitate. And he had this magnetic personality that anyone who was a stranger would soon become a friend. I have yet to meet another person, a newcomer to Georgia, who has been able to be so attractive to so many people and to just win them over with friendship. I've gone back multiple times to visit Luis's family in Guatemala, and we have an adopted son. Actually, Luis and our son share the same birthday, and that's today. That's why Luis is here. He drove from, well, he didn't drive. He hired a driver to bring him from Opelika, Alabama, to come celebrate he can really say 30-something. He's somewhere in his 30s now. It's over 15 years of friendship. But our oldest son is adopted from Guatemala, and he turns 21 today. And so we're going to celebrate these birthdays. But our oldest son is also Mayan, indigenous from Guatemala, and Luis's parents are our son's adoptive grandparents. So much so that actually every time I go back, his dad's name is Pedro in Spanish, it's Lu in Ixil. Every time we go back, his dad loves to tease everyone, loves to joke with everyone in Nevach by telling them that I'm his son. Not that I'm Luis, but that I'm his son from another woman, from an American. That's how much of a family we are, right? That the stranger who was anxious and afraid and alone came into our home, penetrated our hearts, the hearts of our neighbors, of our extended friendship. And now he is a brother, much like Paul and Onesimus. Don't tell me hate is ever right or God's will. And the only peace this world will know can only come from love. In closing, it's not known whether or not Philemon ever took the hint and welcomed Onesimus as a brother. If he didn't, I can tell you, he missed out. But I'd like to believe that he did, and there's some good reason to believe that he may have. You see, years later, when Paul was long dead, Saint Ignatius of Loyola was now in jail, and the bishop of Ephesus had sent some friends to visit Ignatius. And Ignatius wrote a letter using some of the same language that Paul had used in his to Philemon. It's almost as though he was trying to remind them of something. And one of the bishops to whom Ignatius was writing was named Onesimus. Now, Luis may never be a bishop, may never be a saint, but he is my brother.